My name is Anna Helm, and I'm the Faculty Director of the Center for International Business Education and Research, the GW-CIBER, the organizer of tonight's event. GW-CIBER is one of 50 national resource centers across the United States, funded by the U.S. Department of Education, with the broad mandate to increase the competitiveness of U.S. firms abroad. To this effect, we support cutting-edge international business research, provide outreach programming for the business and policy communities, and design and offer innovative educational experiences for students. A cornerstone of our programming revolves around preparing students for careers in international business and related fields. In order to help meet U.S. firms' demands for competent, globally minded talent, tonight's event is an example of such an initiative. We're so excited to have the opportunity to bring together an amazing group of global leaders with our GW students and recent alumni. Over the years, we've had the fortune to work with renowned international careers expert, Stacie Berdan, who has helped conceptualize this event and brought together this impressive group of global leaders who are serving as panelists and discussants today. Stacie is a seasoned global executive, an international careers expert, and a best-selling and award-winning author on how to succeed in the global marketplace. Her career has taken her around the globe, creating successful marketing strategies and communication campaigns for some of the biggest global brands. She has served as coach, counselor, and strategist to CEOs, politicians, senior executives, and students around the world. Stacie has also co-authored 6 books and has been featured in numerous media, including NPR, CNN, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fortune, and the list goes on and on. I will now turn it over to Stacie to get our panel started. Thank you and enjoy today's program.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you to the staff and faculty, administration of GW and CIBER for supporting this terrific event. And in particular, again, I'd like to thank Professor Anna Helm, Alexis Gall, and Nevadomski. They are my GW family. I love the GW-CIBER team, and I'm grateful that we're able to keep working together to further our common objectives, which are helping students understand that increasingly all jobs are global, promoting the importance of global business, especially to the US economy, and inspiring as many of you as possible to seek out the exciting, interesting, fascinating, complex, chaotic, wonderful world out there, everything that it has to offer, both professionally and personally. I'd also like to thank our 4 panelists for giving of their time and expertise, and thanks to the students, the alumni, and all the participants joining us today. I really hope that we can learn from each other. Our topic today is the impact of the ESG movement on global careers. It's also the focus of the Global Careers Podcast Season 3, so check it out. We have 8 new interviews this semester, and of course it will include all 4 of our panelists as well, rolling out 1 a week. So why ESG? Isn't that an investment term for those companies acting responsibly? Well, yes and no. Certainly, ESG is a term used to signify that a financial fund or a corporation, and I'm absolutely oversimplifying here, is committed to the environment, social causes, good governance, ethical behavior. But it goes far beyond investment purposes. Essentially, it's taking a series of expectations and behaviors and incorporating those into how organizations perform, particularly private corporations. For example, what's a company's carbon footprint? Are they doing the most they can to actually combat climate change? How do they treat their employees, even their customers and their clients? How about the role in communities, not only where they're headquartered, but everywhere they operate around the world? Do they follow the regulations, the law? Are they ethical? And this is what we're here to talk about today. In particular, the intersection of ESG and global careers. Because as you might imagine, ESG can be very local, yet once we start dealing and working for and with large multinational corporations, ESG begins to get a lot more complicated and bigger on a global scale. And yes, there are ESG investment measuring tools, but for you, students and professionals, what do you need to know about ESG? I'd like to highlight 4 points just for context before we move into our panel discussion. The first I've already alluded to. ESG is not only for investors, it's not simply a label or a department in an organization, but it's the way that organizations choose to operate. This means that everyone, all employees, and to a certain extent, customers and clients, have a role to play when it comes to ESG. I'm going to repeat that. All of us have a role to play when it comes to ESG. It is not just over there. We're going to get there faster with results if actually we all accept and actually play a part. Second, I think a brief explanation of how we got here might be helpful. So from my perspective, what began for many as kind of community relations, when a company contributes, usually on a local scale, money, maybe clean up the beach, donations to schools or projects, something that an organization can give to make them look better, essentially, usually run or managed by a small local team, sales, PR. This then evolved into CSR, or corporate social responsibility, which broadens these local acts across the organization, but it still remained primarily brand or reputation management focused, oftentimes run by corporate comms, but often also increasingly in the C-suite. But it usually did not affect management and finances, although certainly there are exceptions, and the measurement tools were usually soft or softer and outside the financials. But once these actions began to have an impact on financial standing, shareholder returns, legal implications, and the actual management of business streams, it really changed the nature of the effort, making ESG much more prominent in the C-suite and therefore, by definition, across the entire organization. Which means that ESG is truly global with local implications, which is point number 3. Geography matters. Having a global mindset is an asset today in any job. Cross-cultural understanding, knowledge, and the implications are all intertwined with the ability to drive business profitability and ethical behavior. Geopolitics affect ESG. And, we're seeing this play out right now as companies are making moral decisions about whether or not they operate in Russia. I've heard so many experts commenting about the risk of the short-term financial gain that some companies are choosing by staying with and in Russia, that these are going to be proved to be long-term loss of trust and respect for that company and their brands. This is a really big deal because I don't remember the last time that I saw or witnessed hundreds of companies putting values over quarterly financial profits. It's just not usually done. Yet there are also watchdogs that are helping make it happen. Most famously, there's this professor at Yale, you may have followed him. He's keeping a running tab of the 450 companies' decisions as of today. That's how many. His list has gone viral. He's gotten tons of media coverage, including NPR's Marketplace just this morning. And so people are paying attention and holding these companies accountable, which is a great thing. This is just one example of the intersection of global and ESG, which brings me to my fourth and final point. You, me, all of us, and as employees, we spend the majority of our waking hours working at our jobs, especially if they're demanding jobs. It's not surprising that we want an organization where we feel our values are reflected, and that's becoming increasingly important to so many of us. So you, as you choose your employer, do your research, pay attention to what their ESG framework is. How does it communicate these targets? And of course, very importantly, how does it measure progress and success? As more of us work toward leveraging business for good, the faster we're going to change the world for the better. Doing the right thing and profitability can go hand in hand, and they do. You don't have to choose. You can earn a great salary and feel good about your job. And research shows that many of you, millennials, Gen Z, are doing just that, and you're helping to drive this forward faster, which is a wonderful thing. Remember, a global mindset, it's an asset, and although it's not hard to develop a global perspective, you really do need to work at it. Odds are you're going to be working for a global company, influencing the world, making an impact, so make sure that yours is an informed impact. Learn about the world, learn about the things that interest you, study another language to enhance your understanding, and be just as passionate about your job as you are about making the world a better place. So these 4 fabulous global mentors we have today, they've been operating within this ESG space for decades, and there's a lot to learn from them. We're here today to share ideas and to offer practical advice and tips, not just to talk at you. We're going to have a discussion, and then we're going to go into some nice discussions with you, smaller groups, all to help you prepare for a global career with an eye on ESG. So as you have probably read in their bios, these leaders have broad and deep experience across many fields and industries, including, but not limited to, working for many of the largest, biggest corporations and NGOs in the world, founding their own organization, experience in finance, fintech, environmental, and corporate law, supply chain, trade, communications, marketing. We have global mentors who have experienced living, studying, and working in multiple countries, others managing global teams, some who speak several languages, and every single one of them with a lot significant global experience, a real desire to share what they know to help you better understand the impact of the ESG movement on global careers. I'm confident that their advice will be relevant, inspiring, and absolutely thought-provoking. So let's get started. I'm really excited to be here today and to introduce you to our global mentors. The first, Rosalind Kainyah, is a lawyer, global thinker and speaker, and a thought leader and advocate in the sustainability and ESG space. She's a trusted advisor to boards and senior executives of global companies on responsible business investment and partnerships. She helps to ensure that companies have positive socioeconomic impacts on the countries in which they operate, while yes, realizing optimal financial value. Rosalind was honored with the 2021 Women Who Make a Difference Award by the International Women's Forum. Welcome, Rosalind. Lizette Robinson, she's a senior director for Walmart's Global Ethics and Compliance team. As such, she heads up the Global Transaction Monitoring, Financial Intelligence Unit, and Advanced Analytics for Financial Compliance. Lizette is a multilingual international business executive who has worked for some of the biggest names, EY, PwC, Citibank, and throughout Latin America and Asia. She combines her financial services and emerging tech background with her regulatory compliance and cross-border market experiences to launch innovative products and services on a global scale. Welcome, Lizette. Elizabeth Vazquez is the CEO and co-founder of WEConnect International, a global nonprofit organization that connects women-owned businesses to qualified buyers in country and around the world. As the head of the organization, Elizabeth is responsible for mission delivery and measurable impact. She works with some of the largest multinational companies, NGOs, and governments in 130 countries around the world. She's the co-author of the book Buying for Impact: How to Buy from Women and Change Our World. Welcome, Elizabeth. And Perry Yeatman, she's the head of corporate for Save the Children. She's a dynamic international executive with a proven track record of taking on challenging assignments and delivering. And I know Perry and I have worked together for years in the past. She has an absolutely impressive breadth of experience working around the world for some of the biggest brands out there: Unilever, Kraft, WPP, and more. She's lived and worked in Singapore, Russia, the UK, and the US. And she's also the co-author of my first book, our first book, award-winning Get Ahead by Going Abroad, A Woman's Guide to Fast-Track Career Success. So welcome, Perry. And welcome all global mentors. All right, so that's our panel. As your host, I will be facilitating our event, which is going to be broken up into two components. The first is a panel discussion among our global mentors. They'll begin by answering questions that were already submitted by so many of you, great questions, in advance of today's event. So during this time, everybody make sure that your camera and your mic are off so there's no distractions and we can keep it flowing. After that, we're going to follow on with some questions directly from you. So if you have some questions, don't wait till the question and answer section that we're going to take from the chat. Start putting them in the chat now so that we've got that. And if there's a particular panelist you want to have answer that question, let us know. We may not get to all of them, but we'll do our best. And if we don't, bring them into the breakout sessions, because that is part number 2. Each global mentor will lead a breakout room where many of you have asked to be in certain ones. If you haven't, we've put you in a breakout room, and you'll have the time to network. So turn on your camera, turn on your mic at that time when you're in the breakout sessions, and have a really good discussion. So you've got great networking time for about 20 minutes with a very senior seasoned person who's interested in sharing. So we're going to begin with a little bit of housekeeping. Global mentors, make sure that you've got your mic off as you're listening to the questions, and when I call your name, hit it and turn it on. We're going to start with a quick icebreaker. I'm going to start with Rosalind and then Lizette. So Rosalind, if you did not have to work right now, what would you be doing instead? Traveling around to lots of historical places, because I love history. I love learning about the past and what it teaches me for the future. And I think I'll spend a lot of my time actually in Italy, which is one of my favorite countries, but I would truly travel the world if I wasn't working. Wonderful, wonderful, great. How about you, Lizette? What would you be doing?
So I think probably one of two things, right? So one of my passions is angel investing. So I invest in a lot of startup companies. And so I advise VC funds as well in some of their investments. So I would probably do that more full time. Probably that would be something. And then another thing is, one of the things that I love to do, and it kind of comes a little more from my childhood. When I was younger, my parents would send us to a foreign country and say, okay, you need to learn a new language and learn a new skill. So that's kind of stuck with me sort of ever since. So I would probably go somewhere, go to a foreign country and maybe spend 6 months there and kind of learn a new skill and maybe try to improve my learn a new language, maybe something like that.
Wonderful. Sounds great. So we've got traveling, investing, and traveling and learning a language. Brilliant. Brilliant. I'm going to turn and ask a different question to you, Elizabeth and Perry. So Elizabeth, what talent do you wish you had, or talent or skill, and why?
I was going to say live in the present, because I too often live in the future. But actually what Lizette said is the thing I would love most, is to be able to pick up languages more easily. I was born in Mexico. My last name's Vazquez. People are always like, Vazquez, ¿cómo te llamas? And I'm just like, I freeze, even though I've actually studied Spanish my entire life. But to be able to pick up lots of different languages would be such an incredible gift. And I have so much respect for especially Europeans who speak multiple languages as just the norm. So yeah, that is not my superpower, but that would be amazing.
Great. Wonderful. How about you, Perry?
I was going to say, I wish I'd had Lizette's parents, because, I married one of those guys who speaks 7 languages, right? Because if you are from Denmark, who speaks Danish, right? Nobody. So you have to learn another language. And the thing about language, because that was going to be the thing I wish I could do, right? When I moved to Russia, I did learn enough like basic conversational Russian, right? And I could say hello in like 26 Asian, dialects at one point when I lived in Asia. But beyond that, I was useless, right? 6 years of Latin, that was extremely helpful in my career. But I think the thing about language that's so powerful is that when you unpack a language, you actually end up seeing how much that has to do with the culture and the mindset and the way people actually are. And so I think it's way deeper than just being able to communicate. It's about really having a deep understanding of the people and the history and the heritage. So, we're lining up on the same thing, but I got to say it, I would go for language. And if it's not too late, if your brain's still working, sign up.
I love it. Absolutely agree. And it is definitely a great way to keep those synapses clicking. That's terrific. So the topic of our first question is, how have global careers evolved over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, specifically the last 2, with remote and virtual work playing a significant role in how to pursue an international career? So there are 2 parts to the question. The first, what are your thoughts about this topic? And then second, briefly, just one specific piece of advice. Let's start with you, Perry.
Yeah, I mean, I first moved overseas in 1990, so it's been a while, right? Okay, so, but I think that what I would say is there are more opportunities than ever, because every company, Stacie said it at the top of the conversation, every company, every organization now realizes they have to have a global mindset. They have to be able to understand the context of all the markets, not only that they're actually selling in or employing people in, but also where they're sourcing from, right? So there's just a very broad need. So more ops than ever. It's easier than ever. When I came in 1990, literally we didn't even, email was like barely on the thing. So communicating or being able to stay in touch and get around and whatever, it was 3 flights and 32 hours to go from Philadelphia to Singapore, in 1990. That's really changed, remote everything. So there are more ops than ever. It's easier than ever, but here's the downside. There is more competition than ever. And there is more great competition, because what used to be considered, a US multinational would have wanted to take an American and send them overseas. So they had like a headquarters type person in a market. Again, I'm talking, a while ago, right? But now it's actually, no, how do we take the markets where we source from, the markets where the new consumer markets, how do we actually get talent from there? So the talent pool that companies and organizations are interested in has just exploded in terms of who's available and who do they want. So more, easier, more competition.
So do you have a tip, quick tip?
Yeah, my tip would be do not be deterred. You will never, ever regret having a global experience. And whether you actually show up in that country or not, doesn't matter if you do your homework from home and you invest the time. It's just so worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Great, wonderful. How about you, Lizette? How do you think remotes change things?
I mean, clearly not having to get on an airplane in order to do an international job. Having said that, I think the reason I'm so effective using technology today to keep our network across 130 countries connected is because I've actually been to a lot of those countries and I've actually met those people and I've spent time together and we've broken bread and we've, had gone on adventures together. So I do think that the people who have had the benefit of a lot of travel are going to continue to be uniquely positioned to be very effective in what we do. Having said that, it is very clear that because we do business matching all over the world between women and businesses and large buyers, they no longer have to get on a plane to do business together, to build relationships, to establish trust. Everyone has had to use technology to do what we normally did in person, and it has been extremely effective. It's not the same, but it can be extremely effective. And so my tip is to become really comfortable with technology, which I don't think is an issue for anyone who's in GW right now. I think everyone's very comfortable with technology, but continue to be very comfortable. People get set in their ways with certain technologies, and over time, you don't want to have to shift over to new ones. But we're all going to have to get real comfortable with being uncomfortable all the time and trying new things. So yeah.
Lots of really good information in there. And in particular, knowledge of technology and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Super important actually in today and any time you're working actually internationally. Lizette, what about you?
I think all the points I'm hearing, I would agree with, right? It's evolved over time. It used to be able to go international, you had to be an expat, you had to get on an expat package. They were far and few in between. They were very expensive for companies. Then you kind of saw it started to evolve, and then basically you could become a local in a foreign location, and then companies evolved to that. And then if you started to look at consulting, there would be opportunities in the consulting world where you might have an engagement or an opportunity to do a project internationally, right? Or to be part of a team that's an international. So, I think there's the opportunity now with the way we're also headed with remote work, right? Where you can, to Elizabeth's point, you can now have a global role. In fact, I've been overseeing a global team that's sitting where I would say 80% of the people are sitting outside of the US that are working. And so you can manage that with technology, right? So I think the point is, it's not like you have to you can get a taste for international by, maybe working on an international engagement. So there's different ways to go international. It's not an all-in-one, right? There's only, okay, I got to get stationed internationally or it doesn't count. There's a lot of ways to get there and have those experiences, right? And kind of navigate yourself to be getting those experiences. I do also think sometimes it's important as you think about, your career is, when is it right to have an international assignment? Because sometimes, some of the hard decisions I've had to make in my career, and I haven't always chosen wisely, by the way. Sometimes there might be a really good opportunity for me in the US, but then there's another kind of opportunity internationally that may not be as good of an opportunity for me, but the international side of my brain lures me to make a decision based on, I want to have that international experience. So sometimes you have to kind of choose wisely and think about how will that international experience benefit you in the long run. So that would be a bit of my advice there.
Another super perspective. Thank you, Lizette. Rosalind?
I've had a mega international career, literally living in different countries or going to work in different countries. And I have to say, I think, it has benefited me immensely. But one of the things, I haven't waited for an international company to send me to a country. Sometimes I've just gotten up because, and to Lizette's point, I never think it's disadvantageous to go to have that international experience, because I think it helps you when you come back home. But there are times when I have just upped and gone to a country and looked for work there, in the field that, particularly in the ESG field that I know, because I had done my research, saw the opportunities there, and thought if I went in there as a local, I would, get better embedded and get a richer experience. Because I think sometimes there's a thing of waiting for an international company from your home country to send you somewhere. And actually, when you go in as an expat, it's a very, very different experience. I'm saying that's an option, but it's a very different experience from taking yourself and doing something locally. I think you become more immersed in the country, understand the cultures better. And if you do go as an expat, if a company sends you as an expat, I think the most important thing to do is not to stay in an expat community. I have seen it happen so often that you get an opportunity to go into a different country, and then you just mix with the people that same people back home. So I think it's very important that if you do get that work experience, it's not just about the job, it's about experiencing the country too. And I think that's one of the big things about remote working. Technology, as has been said, makes it easier, definitely. But I think for all of us on this call, the reason why we are comfortable with technology as for remote working and for international work is because we've had that physical experience. And I would very much worry for young people, particularly over the last 2 years, who are missing out on that interconnectivity and being able to move around more freely. So I think don't lose out on that. Yes, technology is there, it's good, but I still think the physical presence in being able to move it to a country, for no matter how long or short it is very important.
When you travel internationally, there's going to be kind of cues or characteristics that you're only going to feel physically and that you're only going to see physically. And so I do think, to that point, it's really important to be able to kind of have those experiences.
Thank you so much for that. Sounds as though our panelists are really kind of all on board and actually coming at the topic with maybe similar, but actually very distinct and different perspectives. So great job, ladies, laying the foundation for global careers. Do it, don't be deterred, use tech as much as you can, but nothing replaces travel and meeting people in person. Go there, mix and mingle with people who live there and are from there to absolutely maximize your learning. All right, so now let's dive into ESG. And I'd like to start with you, Rosalind. We hear a lot about ESG, sustainability these days. You have been working in the field for decades. Can you define the terms for us to set the stage?
I think sustainability and sustainable development are used quite interchangeably. And, I like to use the old-fashioned definition defined in 1987, which means meeting our own needs today without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I think that's an important concept to bear in mind. And that covers both natural needs, our social needs, and economic needs. And when we talk about ESG, those are 3 pillars or 3 dimensions that businesses in particular, I would say, use to measure their sustainability outcomes. And I like to keep it very simple. Environmental means taking care of your natural and physical surroundings. And again, I'm thinking in terms of a business context, but it could also be our own personal context. So that's, our water use, our energy use, as businesses, our impact on biodiversity, etc. Social is taking care of the people who are impacted by your business operations. And I think, Stacie, you mentioned earlier, from your employees, your suppliers, your customers, and communities who might be impacted by your operations. And I've had a career in the mining industry and the oil and gas industry primarily, and now in energy. So our operations really impacted people, and we needed to make doubly extra sure that it didn't impact them adversely. And then governance, I describe as doing business efficiently and with transparency and integrity. So it's how your company polices itself, the structure of your leadership. We're hearing a lot these days about diversity throughout the company, and particularly at the leadership level. Your internal controls, how you make sure that things like your financial audits, ensuring there's no bribery and corruption, I'll dare to say, ensuring that you pay taxes that are due to the countries in which you operate in. So it's those sort of things that are, make sure that your business is run with integrity. So that's the ESG under, the pillars under the roof of sustainability. I hope that's helpful.
That was wonderful. Terrific, Rosalind. And it's really important that you actually pointed out that you've worked for some mining and energy oil companies, oil and gas, that actually people don't always think are the good guys, right? They often think that they're the bad guys. And you actually showed how that actually is important to do that, right?
I'm asked that question a lot. The last time I was asked the question was yesterday. Someone said to me, I would never work for an oil and gas company. I can't see how you say you're a sustainability person and work for one. I said, well, somebody has to be in there making sure they're doing the right thing.
Well, thanks for expanding on that, Rosalind, because I think it's really important. So many times I hear people looking for jobs, they exclude before they really realize or understand the importance of the role that they can play in any kind of an industry. You don't just have to work with the squeaky clean ones, because everybody needs help in this space. So I really appreciate that you shared that. Really important stuff. So Perry, you have worked in corporate and now you work in you work for a nonprofit, global nonprofit. So how have you seen the changes?
Well, I'm going to pick up with something Rosalind said, because I think it's really important. And that is that we've seen ESG now become the heart of the business. And my view of how do you get businesses to change. And so I spent my whole career really trying to look at how do you use the positive power of business to do more good and less harm, right? And so when you take something like Rosalind, oil, gas, mining, whatever, right? The truth is we don't have an answer right now yet for how we're going to do without these industries, right? Or whether, so these industries have to exist today. So the question then is, how can you actually support them on a journey? And some will choose to take that journey and some won't, right? And so the ones that choose, then then I'd be keen to work with them and try and figure it out. But the way I see the evolution, you said it really well at the beginning, which is it started as a philanthropy thing. It started as, really a PR, sometimes called greenwashing, right? It was about, okay, we just don't want the board or the shareholders. We don't let them make any noise about it, right? So even if you gave the money, it was kind of, you didn't really write a press release about it. It was just like, we just have to have a story to tell, put it over here. Very much on the side of the business, or even completely outside the business as a corporate foundation. Today, it is really the companies that are doing it well. And I think the only way you ultimately do it is to completely bake it into the way you do business. And that's what the best organizations are doing. So it is not just a division or just the consumer facing products or whatever. It is about what you do, how you do it, where you source from, how you employ. It's all of those things are looked at. And you can't necessarily tackle everything at once, but because it is in the C-suite, as you said, it's now become a CEO agenda, a board agenda item that lets you develop this global strategy that then drives towards, we used to say at Kraft, it's for me to care about it as the global head of corporate and government affairs, it has to be big to us and we have to be big to it, right? So it means I'm only going to pull the levers where I am uniquely able to make a difference and where making that difference is really going to help or hurt my business, right? So that's how we used to think about it. I think that's where companies are going now. And if you have the full set of companies doing their part, with every industry doing what it can and should focus on, that's how we're going to get there.
Wonderful, Perry. Great add-on. I want to turn it a little bit to the UN sustainability goals. Elizabeth, I know that is one of your passions and one of your organizations, the focus of WEConnect International. Why don't you tell us about how that plays into ESG?
That is a great question, because there are so many ways to look at the metrics of moving beyond, as Rosalind said and Perry said. You can talk about it all day long, but show me what you're actually doing. What steps are you taking, and how is this in your DNA? Not just your press release, and not just putting a few people on the board or just putting out a few reports with your budgets. It really needs to be a part of how all of your people understand that this is part of our business. It's how we do business, because we want to do no harm. And we want to leverage the talent of the world and be inclusive in that process. And we want to let our buyers and our partners and our vendors know that we care about the communities that we serve. And I think the ESG, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, are a way for everyone to come together, private sector, public sector, civil society, individuals, to have a list of metrics that are measurable, that will move us towards the ultimate goal of ESG, which is sustainability, inclusive growth, where everyone contributes, but everyone benefits. And we do it in a really transparent way. So I think we have a long way, frankly, to achieve the SDGs, which are coming up in terms of the goal, the year of 2030. SDG 5 is about equality, and we will not have equality by the year 2025 if we're going at the rate we're going today. But we are moving in the right direction. And so I think a lot of this is continuing to expect more from ourselves and each other, so that we do ensure that everyone is benefiting and that the world continues to be a good space for all of us to thrive, and all the plants and animals and all that it takes to have a true ecosystem.
Thanks for that. It's really important, isn't it, to have a big global body actually set the different targets and the measuring stick, if you will, so that companies and organizations can measure their progress against. It's really important, and they can police it, but they can also help, and they can actually help make a difference. So I want to turn now to, so we talked a lot about ESG generally. So many times people think ESG environment, climate change, and they think ethics. So Lizette, I know that you work in tech and finance when it comes to ethics. How do you see that playing out on a global scale?
Yeah, so what's interesting is when we think about the word ethics, right? And I think some of the examples that Rosalind was giving before it, ethics is a lot broader than how we think about ethics, right? For example, if we were to kind of even go beyond the realm of what I'm focused on from an ethics perspective, which is much more around things like sanctions, if you're thinking about the Russia sanctions, for example, or if you're thinking about, financial crimes, detecting fraudulent activities, or detecting, money laundering type scams. It goes much beyond that. It really goes into things like, for example, integrity, the way people act at work. If you think about an employee and their safety at work, and how they're treated with respect. How do we kind of define and look at that? So it goes broadly. Then we can think about other types of compliance areas, maybe things like food and safety. And we think about product safety. We may think about things like efficiency, right, and carbon footprints. So the list kind of goes on and on, right? And so I think it's actually a very broad area. And so as you kind of look within each one of those segments, they all kind of have their own metrics and their own kind of what we would define as, let's say, successful. How would we define success in each one of those areas, and what are the desired outcomes that we want? Each one of those areas has its own metrics and has its own evaluation criteria. And I think what a lot of companies look to do is, how do they think about those different areas and kind of look at that as a holistic area, and how do they kind of link across all those different verticals that I just described, right? And in a financial institution, a lot of the products are very similar and they're the same, but when you go into retail and you go into other areas, it just gets, the definition of ethics and compliance gets broader and broader. You could look at the supply chain and look at the ethics around the supply chain, right? For example, pricing. You might think about bribery and corruption as you think about the supply chain. So it touches a lot of different areas. And it's a very, very broad topic, right? And so, what we try to do is really kind of focus within the vertical. And as we kind of focus within the vertical, there's probably some metrics and standards that will cut across verticals. And then that's kind of what basically then comes to the top of the house.
Can I just add something to what Elizabeth said about the SDGs? Sometimes when we think about the SDGs in business, we're thinking, how does that apply to business? And I want to give an example of a business that I sit on the board of. And this business makes what I call widgets, small electronic components that go into big equipment. But the strategy of the business in deciding what end markets or which markets it wants to make these components for was to look at the SDGs and to select 4 SDGs. So they selected energy because there's a sustainable development goal about access to energy. There's one on health, there's one on transportation, and there's one on sustainable cities. So they selected these 4 SDGs, made them the basis of the strategy, and on that basis decided these are the industries, because they're future industries. These are industries that are going to contribute to the sustainable development goals. And so these are the industries that we're going to manufacture these really small components, where there's an antenna for. And I think that's a very interesting and holistic way of a company integrating ESG or sustainability into its core business and making money from it, as well as doing good. And I just wanted to give that as an example. It was why I chose to go on the board of that company too, because this thing about companies that are being sustainable, attracting the right people is very important and very true.
Well, that's a great point, Rosalind. I mean, that company actually attracted you to their board, which is a stellar find, but also younger employees or new employees, actually recruiting people. That's another way to actually make sure that you recruit some of the best people. So when you're going through some of these interviews, folks, I mean, ask questions. Ask some of these questions, very pointed questions about what the company is actually doing to direct itself and its energies, measure its progress within ESG, specifically related to the sustainability goals.
I think almost every company is. I don't know, every company I'm dealing with at Save the Children, one of the ways we begin a conversation that lines up is because if you look at their reports and their strategy, they've tied to some SDG, and then we know which ones we're aiming at. And so it's the shorthand global way to say, are we probably going to have an intersection point here in terms of what we're trying to drive to as global change? So I think you're going to find any company is going to have that list.
Great advice. Great way to sum it up. So next question, I'm going to go to you, Perry and Rosalind. But Rosalind, let's start with you. Sustainability issues are often local, community-based. How does the role of ESG affect the pursuit of a global career?
Again, I think you mentioned something about it, Stacie. So I'll take the examples of like the companies I've worked for in the past that are big international companies. And I think because of the nature of the company, so we're sitting there doing big international things. In terms of ESG from the top, we'll hear about our investors or our shareholders expecting us to have in place the right environmental, social, and governance metrics, which are proving that we are operating with best practices. So that's from the investor wanting to make sure that their money is going into the right place and is safe. But at the same time, so one day I'm sitting, at a board table or talking to the directors. The next day, I'm down in the local place sitting under a very hot roof, talking to community members, because that's where it matters. That's where it really takes place. That's where the practice is. So there's this sort of link between this global thing happening in the city of, say, London or in New York, and a company where the actual impact, the actual environmental and social impact is happening on the ground. So it doesn't, in a way, I just see, I think I've been quite fortunate in the careers I've had, the companies I've worked for, that connection, that value chain works right through, and so it's again, is the influence from above, as I'll put it, making sure that right through the value chain, you're doing the right thing below. So it isn't, I haven't seen it as purely local. I see the impact as local, but I see the influence, let me say, as more international. So for me, that's where the link is.
Absolutely. Perry, would you like to add to that?
I think Rosalind hit the high points. Like we used to call it at Craft global, right? The goal was to be neither mindlessly global nor hopelessly local, right? It was like, you got to find the blend. And the way I think about it for ESG is the strategy tends to be national or international or truly global. But in order to bring that to life, when you think about how do you actually make a difference, it is every single transaction, every single engagement, every single activity. So it is really The way that strategy comes to fruition is through local action and activity in the right context at the right time, et cetera. So I think you got to have both, and I think most organizations do. The trick is, and I think this is probably where Rosalind really shines, is they don't know how to execute locally, right? Everybody can sit, because they can hire 1,000 consultants. Everybody can sit at headquarters and write the world's best strategy. The reason they come to me after they've got the world's best strategy and Save the Children is because they realize if they're working in a cocoa supply chain and they're trying to work on eradicating child labor, they don't actually know how to get community-based, sustainable, scalable, replicable change for kids. That is not what that company is an expert at, right? But we have a whole bunch of people that's what they do all the time, embedded in those countries and communities, from those countries and communities. And so I think it is that balance.
Well, that's a nice segue, because you both talked about skills. You touched on skills. So what are the most essential skills that you've seen to be the most useful when trying to pivot into a career in ESG? So Elizabeth, how about Lizette? Why don't you start?
Again, it's hard because as I kind of think with regards to ESG, I think about the skills that open doors to any kind of career that you want, and it's interesting because the skills that are really critical kind of vary at the different stages of your career. So I think first and foremost is, right, are you working in an area, right, that has some kind of international component, right? Are there projects that have an international impact? Is there an international piece to that? And so I think having experience kind of working on some type of international rollout, right? So I would say sometimes program management experience is really critical, because a lot of those initiatives that are going to be global will require someone that has a good program management skill set and knows how to execute a global program, which, sometimes, you'll have to make decisions. What do you build at the core? How much do you standardize versus how much do you localize, and kind of understanding those experiences. I think language skills are important, right? I know that I've gotten engagements in Latin America because I spoke Spanish, and that was really a deciding factor. So I think language skills are important. And then I think also technology skills are going to become more and more critical. Your ability to kind of leverage technology. And then number 4, communication skills. Those are and that's probably right now for me, what I see is I'm having to manage groups in so many different locations under a lot of transition. How well am I as a leader and as a communicator? And that's really becoming my most important skills right now from a global perspective. But early in my careers, language, program management, and then I think technology skills would be my top 3.
That's great. Elizabeth, what do you think?
If you care about ESG and you want to have an impact and help other organizations be good on ESG or be better, be really open-minded about who you work for. I have a lot of friends who held their values very, very tight, and they will only work for the best of the best in the ESG space. And I would just say to that, you're not necessarily going to have the greatest impact if you don't keep an open mind to where you could have impact, but you're ignorant about the power of that organization. And Lizette, I hope you don't mind me picking on you, but I've had friends over the years who had heard, some things about hadn't heard that Walmart was a huge champion in the women's economic empowerment space. What I like to share with them is Walmart is the only organization in the entire world that has ever spent $20 billion with women-owned businesses and put $20 billion into the hands of women who became suppliers to Walmart and learned to earn that money and compete for that money. There is no government agency, there's no multilateral institution, there's no other corporation that has had more of an impact on women's economic empowerment by moving money into the hands of women who in turn choose how that money is spent in their communities than Walmart. And so I think anyone should be honored to get to work with Walmart and all that comes with its purchasing power, its brand influence, its leadership in what it's doing in the green space. Massive progress in the green space. And Walmart doesn't necessarily talk about the advances it's making behind the scenes in ESG, but a lot of corporations around the world look to what Walmart is doing to replicate those models. And so it's really great that everyone has a chance to get to talk with Lizette to understand what Walmart has been up to, because it's really impressive. And I think Rosalind and Perry, you've both made the point that, you know, really being open-minded about where the opportunities are to make a difference in your career is really important, and do things that make you uncomfortable, do things that you're not sure about, and embrace those opportunities. And I think that's why all of us are where we are, is because we did stuff that maybe wasn't an obvious career path, but we were willing to try it and learn along the way. And it's an amazing journey.
To underscore that point, if you have a personal mission in ESG and you think of aggregate impact, you can do more moving a laggard to the midpoint than you will accomplish by taking a leader and trying to make them 2% better, right? So I'm not saying you have to work with every laggard. There are some, they don't have the right intention, but where they are today is not necessarily where they're going to be in 5 years. And if you find a laggard who wants to be a leader, that is a diamond in the rough. That is a really good place to go.
I'd encourage people to work for Walmart and learn from Walmart, and then go and find a laggard and bring them forward, because I think you need to be somewhere where you can learn, but then don't stay there too long. Go out and be an evangelist somewhere else, because we need a lot more evangelists in this field.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for our listeners and the audience participants to hear that sometimes you have to do the work. You actually have to look at the non-obvious employers and organizations to really find out what's going on. So that's great advice. You know, actually, I've kind of goosebumps actually from hearing everybody talk, and the adulations to Walmart when so many people don't know actually what the great stuff that they're doing. So thanks for that. I've loved it, and that's why we're actually here having this great panel discussion. So I want to move to the next question. What industry shifts or trends do you see with respect to ESG? Rosalind, let's start with you.
Almost everything is impacting the ESG space. And so, I mean, first of all, I think the most popular one that we'll all have heard about is climate change. But I'll go into some of the maybe not so obvious ones. Things like data protection is something that comes under the G, particularly with the breadth of technology and the ability of the information that's out there. We're finding that there are a lot more legislation coming up about how people should treat other people's data. So that's a trend that is under the G. Diversity, equality, and inclusion, which we've heard a lot about, particularly recently. Again, another big trend that is influencing labor practices or working practices, or how companies treat the employees. In the same way, I think what we've seen is that the coronavirus pandemic has also focused a lot more on the S of the ESG in terms of, again, how companies are treating people. I think companies have become a lot more empathetic about flexible working hours, and particularly for women, we're finding a lot more companies recognizing that their workers were just as productive working from home, if not even more so than when they came into the office. So there's a lot of leaning towards how can we create more flexibility. And then I think one of the most influential trends, which you spoke about, Stacie, is investors looking at where best to put their money and making almost moral or ethical decisions, at least with ESG in mind, about where they will invest. That can be a double-edged sword. Sometimes it can be just greenwashing, but I think on the whole, people are becoming a lot more savvy both big investors and also people in our audience, the millennials, about where they want to invest. So I think that again is a trend where when people are looking for funds, they realize that they have to do a lot more in the ESG space. And I'm finding that I'm getting a lot of advice from particularly private equity funds in Africa who are looking for money from Europe or the US or the UK, coming to me to say, oh, they're asking me all these questions. Today, I do not lie, but I saw a list of questions from a potential investor. There were 999 questions, and I could show it to you. Of these, that was it was ridiculous. So, but I sort of went through it and said, you don't have to bother with this, but they have this sort of, it's an Excel sheet that's big, but that is driving a lot of ESG practice. So those are some of the trends.
So Rosalind, I know you touched a little bit on tech, and Lizette, that's what you do, tech and the financial compliance. So would you like to expand on that a little bit?
It's interesting to me because a lot of times when you think of ESG, a lot of people invest in ESG because they think it's the right thing to do, right? But they don't think about it as a place to invest to make money. But the reality is, if you kind of look at the ESG funds and their performance, right? You even look at, for example, I recently invested in a diversity fund called Rising America. It's actually in the top bracket. Its performance is in the top bracket of all VC funds. It's in the top 5%. Because guess what? It's investing in areas where others aren't identifying the opportunities, whether it might be media and television in the Latino space. So they're not getting the investments and they're not getting the dollars. And so there's a huge opportunity out there in a lot of areas of ESG. And, as basically as investors look to find returns, they're looking at different areas. So you're beginning to kind of see ESG as an investment area, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's an opportunity to make money and invest in the future of where money's headed, right? Things like clean energy, that is the future, and that's where we're headed. So there's definitely that. I'm seeing that intersection point. And then I'm also seeing emerging technologies start to play a role in ESG. So for example, blockchain, so it's an area that I've focused on in the past, and digital currencies. You're beginning to see blockchains and focused on areas like food and safety and product safety. How do we have provenance and how do we track products from beginning to end across the supply chain, and how do we use technology to do that? Beginning to see things like AI and machine learning starting to play a role in looking at ESG and looking at sentiment, for example, and where are the areas of interest that people are focused in, so that thematic funds in the ESG area can tailor and put their money in areas that people are interested in and would want to focus their funds. So there's a lot of activity that I'm beginning to see, and it's exciting, right? Because basically when the money starts to go into ESG, right, that's when the big shift starts to happen. And I think a lot of the companies in the past were really early adopters of that. But now the money is chasing returns and it's going in the space, and that's just a great trend that I'm seeing.
That's really fascinating, Lizette. Thanks for sharing that. I'd like to actually now turn it back, as we're coming up on the time. I want to turn it back to global careers and ask a personal question, personal side of things. Have your personal relationships been tested by your global careers? Elizabeth, let's start with you.
Well, I'm now divorced. So yes, being on the road all the time makes it very difficult to have and maintain relationships. That's not for everyone. I mean, I travel all over the world and I meet people who are superstars in their careers, men and women, non-binary people who have long-term relationships. Someone gets posted in a new place, they move together as a family. So it's not that it's not possible. It's just really hard if one of you or both of you are traveling all the time. And that's just a reality. I think that, just physically being together. And I think a lot of families became stronger during COVID because I, for one, was home and I got to spend a lot of time with my kid. And now my aunt lives with us, and we're a really tight family and get to have lunch together. And that was not possible in the past, and play together and do fun stuff evenings and weekends. So it's having this kind of career where you're really passionate about making a difference in the world and leaving the world a better place is not something. I don't have regrets, but you do have to really work hard on all of your relationships. Your friendships get challenged, your family relationships get challenged, but your friends and family love you and they know that that's who you are and they embrace you as you are. And so there are really good aspects to it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was really honest. Super important for everyone to hear, because oftentimes people just think it's this glamorous, wonderful world, globetrotting around fabulous destinations, but it can be really hard. Not only hard on our relationships, it actually can be hard on our bodies, our friendships, our lives in general. So thanks for that. Perry, what do you think?
Yeah, it was glamorous and fabulous in the 90s when I started, because, you know, you got to fly first class, and back then there wasn't all of the same security issues. But no, in truth, I want to say what Elizabeth said is absolutely accurate. I think for families, it is really hard, right? It can be really hard. Now, I will tell you that when I was doing international for craft, my daughter was probably 4. And I kind of just took her with me everywhere I went. My husband came and my daughter came, and my son was already living in Denmark. So like we just traveled everywhere. So my kid, by the time she was 10, the younger one, actually had been on 4 continents, and she would, talk about Buddha, and she'd be talking about, well, when we were in China and when we did this and that. And her, first grade teacher's like, are you kidding? Right? It's like, nope, we've done that. So I think it can be amazing for family, but Elizabeth, to the point, we made that work because my husband did not work, right? And he loved to travel. So we would just put him on a plane and we would all go, right? That's how we handled that. But I want to put about the positive, right? So let's just acknowledge that it's hard. And even though you've got Zoom and all these things you never had before, right? I had long distance relationships, Singapore to, Wilmington, Delaware, and then Russia to London and whatever. And before Zoom, it was crazy, right? Your phone bill was $5,000 a month just trying to have a relationship. It was nuts. But these days you have all that, but the truth is that it's better, but it's not the same as physically being in the same. It's the same thing we talked about with work, right? There's just no replacement ultimately for physically being there. So I just want to finish with, keep in mind, there are the challenges, but I got to tell you, a lot of my best friends in the world also came from that same global experience, right? Every single market I lived in, I collected a handful of amazing people that I would never have met or had the chance to become friends with had I not lived in Singapore and Russia and London and whatever. And so it's really interesting when I look across, in these days, a lot of what I'm trying to do is connect the dots, right? At Save the Children with different companies and organizations and governments around the world. The fact that I have an amazing, okay, I'm going to date myself again, Rolodex, right? This great network of people from all over the place, that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't lived there. Because I will tell you, the expat experience is also a bonding experience like nothing else. If you do, somebody gave the advice, don't go live in like the expat community or whatever. I never did. That wasn't what I did. And because of that, you just get incredible friendships. So yes, your relationships are tested, but they're also forged of steel and they are made stronger, and you get new ones too.
That's great. Wonderful. Honest advice again, keeping it real, super important. I'd like to turn now to do one quick lightning round to ask each of you just choose one topic, one area of focus, or one skill that you believe to be critical for those early in their careers right now. Let's go, Rosalind.
It was mentioned before, communications, but I call it corporate diplomacy, being able to influence people both within the company and outside the company on what you believe in. I think it's very important. I think it's a skill that needs to be learned, but a very important one.
Wonderful. Lizette, how about you?
I think language and cultural competency are really important.
Okay, great stuff. Elizabeth?
Keen observation coupled with being a good listener. So just because you observe doesn't mean you have the right to speak, but being a really good listener, yeah, really important.
And Perry?
So, I think it's that big picture global mindset, but it's a global mindset that comes from cultural understanding. You've got to figure out how you can understand the people, because at the end of the day, everything, work and life, is going to come down to relationships.
Okay, so one of the first questions that has come in is from Lydia, and she wants to know about the importance of salary. Should she actually leave the current company she's in to go to take a position at a better company with a reduced salary? And does she need to stay at a certain mining company for so long? What do you think? I think, Rosalind, I think you're probably best suited to start answering this question. What do you think?
I have moved from one place to another with a big salary cut for that very reason, because of impact. But I would say that forget about the salary for the moment. I think if you're going somewhere to make an impact, you owe it on the company that you're going to know what you're going to do there, to understand what you're going to do. So if you get this opportunity of being a graduate trainee in an international mining company for 5 years or whatever, stay there for the 5 years. You learn so much. There's always the opportunity to move to a smaller company later, and you go richer. Because if you move too quickly, you're not really going to give that small company your best, and you're going to miss out on a lot that you could have learned in the big company. But I would say, for me, salary is never, it always works out. I took a massive salary cut moving from an international law firm to a mining company. Interestingly, it just goes down what the law firms pay. But and after a year of just getting on with my job, the salary increase went back up and matched. So it wasn't the salary, but it was the impact I made because of what I'd learned. So I think it's a question of learn as much as you can where you are, and then move somewhere and give there, and then you truly will make an impact.
The only thing I want to add to that, I think that, and to my point before, right, when we were just talking a little bit about ESG, and that, now people, it doesn't always, I think, getting paid a good salary and being, being kind of functional in the ESG space, there doesn't have to necessarily be mutually exclusive. But I do think, right, if you have a passion and you want to make a difference and you want to make a pay cut, then I think, you need to follow your passion. You need to go for it to make that difference, right? So, again, salary should be to the side. I think it's really about what kind of impact do you want to make, right?
I also would just add that in the first 10 years of your career, it is more about learning and experience and growth than it is about salary. That doesn't mean it's not important, but what I would say is, unless you have a financial reason that you must hit a certain number, which, let's be honest, some people do, that is just the facts of life. But other than that, I really think you need to be saying, where am I going to be building the skills and experiences that I can then in 5 to 10 years convert into a big job and a good salary, whatever. That's the number one thing. You've got to be learning and growing, and it should be exponential in the early years. Good
stuff. Thank you, Lydia. I hope that answered your question. And we've got another one coming in that I actually hear a lot from students. So I want to pursue an international career. Is there some particular niche, industry, maybe marketing, communications, HR? What is it that actually I should follow for the best shot at having an international career? Who'd like to take that one?
I have something there. Some of the best advice I ever got was once I was looking for, that international experience, and somebody said to me, look, if you can't find the perfect job for yourself out there, it's not that you have to leave. Why don't you propose what that is and find a way to kind of get an angle there? So I think sometimes if you become proficient in a topic or an area, right, and you start to think about how it might apply to where you're at or where there could be opportunities. I have found people that have become experts in certain areas that fall within the ESG umbrella, and that passion and that knowledge then come into play to kind of help them migrate into that area. But I think you have to be kind of in it to make it happen, right? Like if you want to build a brand for yourself in a certain area, you're going to have to start to do that. I've seen people that didn't have a brand in diversity and inclusion, or even in like investing, say, hey, this is my goal and I'm just going to start to do it. What are the baby steps that I can go to kind of build my brand in this area, my knowledge and my experiences? And they just kind of immerse themselves in it. And then opportunities started to come their way because they put themselves there, right? And they put themselves in the right place at the right time by just kind of being in the moment and getting into it.
I'd now like to ask our global mentors to share one salient piece of advice from the breakout rooms. Who'd like to go first?
I'll go first. I think, if I may, Stacie, I think it was the question that was asked about, I want an international business career, but I don't know in what area, how do I go about it? So my advice was two things, because that's such a broad question. Either get a mentor to help you tease out what you're good at, what you're passionate about, you know, and help direct you, or get onto a graduate scheme with a company that has lots of different departments so you can move around a bit. And through that, you'll be able to determine, maybe find out what you're interested in and pursue that. So that was, yeah, that was my advice.
Right. Just be open-minded. As long as you understand that there are problems in the world and you're adding value, people will pay you to fix problems. So if you can just constantly be offering solutions to problems, you'll do very, very well. And we have way too many ESG problems for any one person to fix. So there's lots of opportunities for everyone to make a contribution and to do well and to get paid fairly for that contribution.
But one of the questions that stuck with me a little bit was, how do you embed kind of an ESG mindset in what you do every day? And it was a great question. And, you know, one of the ways I think about that is, you know, how do we kind of drive the change that we want to see in the world, and how do we drive it in everything that we do day to day? And, you know, I think that that's something that we have control over. And so I was kind of giving an example where, you know, I've got about 400 people that are reporting into me, and, you know, we make a lot of decisions on who we hire and what their skill sets are and who we give opportunities to. And, you know, I think in some cases, I got some feedback that we over-index so much on diversity and inclusion. Were we considering enough white male candidates in what we were looking at? So we over-indexed, actually. And that was just about driving diversity and opportunity for those. And, you know, ways to be empathetic, right? That if we find that we're in a room and someone doesn't get a chance to speak, calling them out and saying, hey, Jan, what do you think about this topic if other people aren't giving them a chance? So there's so many ways that we can be inclusive and drive the change that we want in little ways. And so that would be my my advice.
So one of the things that we were talking about, that pivot question from being where they are into ESG was one of the ones that came back up. And I think that what I said is what you need to understand in any pivot, it's not just ESG, is that today's screen, like, you know, Indeed and all of these, you know, like automated systems, right? Where do you ever get to meet a human, right? You're putting your resume in 1,000 times. And those things are brilliant at basically looking down and saying, if you don't have exactly the 22 things that they've been, you know, that have been written in the job description, they bump you out, right? You never meet a human. So what I said is when you're making a pivot, you need to be aware that you aren't going to be screened very well in those things, right? So you need humans. You need to find your connections. You need to find a way to be able to take what you do right now, translate it into why that's going to make you even better at whatever it is you're trying to transfer into, right? That unique perspective. And we were talking about, like, if you're an architect and you want to go into ESG, how do you use your background in architecture? Maybe you go into a commercial real estate developer, and you say, okay, I want to be on your ESG team. I don't want to design your buildings anymore, but the fact that I know how to design a building makes me even more knowledgeable and authoritative to try and sit on your ESG team, something like that. And so it was about rethinking and packaging what you already know into this new space, and then looking for a human that you actually have a chance to talk to about that.
That's wonderful. Ladies, I could continue this conversation with you for hours on end. It's been terrific, amazing, rich, substantive discussion, and I'm so appreciative of you and all of your time. Again, thanks to the GW-CIBER team, all the participants that participated today, attended. Hope you got a lot out of it. Big thank you to everybody, and again, especially Global Mentors, Elizabeth, Perry, Rosalind, and Lizette. Thanks so much, and we will see you again soon.